everybody. Um, wow, been an interesting time, I must say. Uh, let's take a few minutes first and get settled with a brief meditation as we usually do. And then I have a couple of announcements and then we will be off and running. So if you have things on your lap or whatever, you might want to put them aside and get yourself in a comfortable position. Allow yourself to get in a relaxed state. Let your eyes gently close and go where you go when you go. Welcome back. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. And a couple of announcements I have to make. The first one is that May will be our 25th anniversary, the 25th anniversary of Chicago IANDS, and almost every month since May 98, I have led a meeting for Chicago IANDS. We've had amazing speakers and they're all documented on our website. If you have interest in going back and seeing who all's been here, it's all there, along with a lot of more information as well on the website. All of these speakers that we've had since we've been online in September of 2020, that's when we started online, and all of the speakers since then are online on our website. We have about 80 other online presentations in YouTube, and you can access them from our website. There's a section in the email that I send out that has news in it, and there's some news there about the upcoming anniversary. We're not having a big celebration like we might have had if it hadn't been for the pandemic, but we discussed it as a board and decided that um, anybody who wants to come to Ruby's in Skokie for dinner after the meeting, including tonight, for the next year, we could start having that little bit of physicality, a little bit of sociability by doing that. It's not the same as having the meeting at the hospital, but it's better than nothing. And anybody is welcome to come. And particularly interested in having a few people show up in May, because that's the official anniversary, and we'll have a cake, and we can make it a little bit more of a celebratory event. 25 years is a long time, I've discovered. Anyway, that's the big thing. Now I'm going to make another announcement about the upcoming anniversary. And that is, we were looking for a way to have it be somehow special. And somehow, I guess my guides gave me the idea. About 2 years ago, we had PMH Atwater as a speaker for our meetings. And most of you know who PMH is. If you don't, find out, because she's quite a special and unique person. She was one of the first people I met the first time I went to an IANDS conference back in 1997. And she was very helpful to me, and we've been friends ever since. She's written about 30 books, and she spent her life researching near-death experiences. She's had 4 or 5 near-death experiences of her own. And she's a very interesting lady. And she came to speak, and she spent the weekend at my house with me. She's been here several times. But at the last one, she came, she was wearing her red coat. It was winter, it was cold out, but she had on this thin red coat, and it was all kind of frayed around the edges and around the cuffs. I said, you know, PMH, it's time to get a new coat. And she said, well, I don't have time to go shopping. I said, well, we can go shopping while you're here if you want to. So we went over to Old Orchard, and I forget where it was, but she found a new coat, and she left the old one behind. And she said, do with it whatever you want. So I thought, you know, that coat is filled with her energy. Her energy is very powerful. She's very intuitive. You know, I thought, you know, somebody might like to have that coat. If not to wear it, you could fold it up and put it in a pillowcase and sleep on it. You know, I don't know what you might want to do with it, but it's definitely a valuable souvenir. So we're going to auction it off for the anniversary. And I will be sending out an email this event within the next week and send you a picture of it. She's a small lady, I guess about a 10 or 8, 12, somewhere in there. But at any rate, the highest donation to Chicago IANDS during the next month will get PMH's coat. And so watch for that email. It will be coming, as I said, within the next week. I wanted to do it sooner, but you know how life is. It's been crazy. So watch for that. And that's the big news. We want to get a big donation, because we've gotten almost no donations for the last 3 years. I don't say no. I very appreciated what we've gotten, but what we've gotten has not paid the bills. So just so you know. And so we'd like a big donation for it. So and whatever you donate is you can take off your taxes. So it's tax exempt. So we're a tax exempt organization. So that's the first big announcement. The second announcement is that I received a call from Sharon Lund a couple of days ago. I don't know if any of you remember her. She's spoken for our group, and she actually died of cancer. And I mean, she was completely emaciated, and she was in very bad straits, and she died completely from this illness, and she came back healed, and her story is riveting. I want to ask her to tell it again. It's been years since she told it for us, but she now lives in Hawaii, and she and some of her friends are putting together a retreat for next summer for people who've had spiritual experiences. So anybody who thinks they might kind of like to go to Hawaii, this is a good time to make a plan and be part of the retreat. But what she wanted most was for people to respond to a questionnaire, so that as they're planning the retreat, they can make it the most user-friendly that they can do. So in the email that you should have gotten today and earlier, the one in the earlier in the week, it's not on there, but the one from today is different. And under the news, later in the email, as you mostly know, there's a little thing where I have numbers. It's number 3, and it gives the link to the survey for Sharon for this retreat. And even if you're not sure you're going to go, or you're not sure you want to go, you could go online and fill out the survey about things you might like to have there and what you might like to do if you would do it. And she would be extremely grateful. So if you would do that, that would be terrific. Okay, those are the main announcements. So our speaker next month is Sharon, Suzanne Northrup, the grief counselor and wonderful, intuitive. She will be our speaker next month, and we will be celebrating and going to Ruby's after the meeting. And anybody who wants to go tonight can. I think the meeting is over at about 4, so I'm thinking 4:30 to 5 is a good time to start arriving at Ruby's. They don't have many people there at that time, and we get the pick of the place, as it were. So if you can join us, please do. And now we get to the good part. Our guest speaker, John Audette, who was speaking for us a few years ago. John was the original, most founding founder of IANDS back in the 70s. And he's had a long career as an administrator for hospitals and hospice and all kinds of good things. And he's been guided to many people who've had near-death experiences. And he just published a new book. Would you hold your book up, John? Because I left it downstairs. When I tried to get on today, I couldn't get on, so I had to go upstairs to my upstairs computer. So I don't have all my stuff. Loved by the Light, great new book. All kinds of wonderful stories, things that he's run across during his life, and he's going to share more about that with us today. So give a warm welcome to John Audette. Thank you, John, for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Diane, for having me. It's good to see you again, and to see some familiar faces and a lot of new faces. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Diane, for Chicago IANDS. Happy 25th anniversary next month. I was there for your 21st at North Shore.
Was that what it?
Yeah, we celebrated the birth of a newborn baby on my birthday. It was actually May 9th. So
It was Marcia's granddaughter.
Marcia's daughter's daughter. So she's now 4. I can hardly believe it. To me, it seems like a year ago, but so time is a great trickster, as we were talking earlier. It's delightful to be with you all. Thank you for your time. I know you have many choices of how to spend your time, and the fact that you're here means a lot, and try to make it worth your while. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate Easter. To those of you who don't, happy times. You know, I podcast presentations are a little difficult because you know, show of hands, I can see, I guess you all can see, but the audience interaction is a little more difficult with a podcast than it is in real, live in real person. But we'll do the best we can. And I want to start with telling you a little story about why I wrote this book. I have been invited to write books over the last 48 years of work in this area by publishers. And I've always declined because I never felt I had anything unique to contribute to the literature. And one of my complaints about the literature is that it's very redundant. And I'm sort of a stickler for trying to lessen literary pollution by only publishing things that really are important and really make some kind of unique statement that can be of benefit. So I kept, I wrote chapters in different books and I helped others with their books, but I never felt compelled to write my own. So the story, which I didn't really write about, I dedicated the book in part to Ken Ring, because Ken and I have been on this journey together since 1976. And he called me in October of 2021, which again seems like yesterday. And he asked me, he said, you know, I don't know what Ken's preoccupation is with death, but all of a sudden he's been, the last few years, he's like waiting to die, you know, he's in his late 70s and he has some physical issues. Sight is failing him and so on. And he thinks he's not much longer for the world. So he called back then and he said, John, would you agree to be my eulogist? And I said, yeah, I'm deeply honored by that, Ken. I'm happy to, but I should take a number and stand in line. I think many people would like to be your eulogist. He said, well, you'll say you'll exaggerate and say the kindest things about me. And I said, no, not at all. I said, I think everybody is going to miss you when you go, and I hope that's not going to be anytime soon. So then that conversation, he said to me, do you remember when we first met back in 1976? He hadn't written Life at Death yet. And I drove up to Storrs to meet with him because he was a professor at University of Connecticut. And he said, I'd asked you if you had had any extraordinary experiences, and you told me about what you thought might be an angel encounter. It was picking up a hitchhiker, falling asleep at the wheel, and I picked up this hitchhiker who just appeared out of nowhere, and it was a man dressed in a white suit, carrying a Holy Bible, and it was like, I don't know, 5:30 in the morning, Southwest Virginia, and I was on my way to pick up Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was speaking at a association meeting in Abington. So I was going to Tri-Cities Airport, and I was about to run off the road. I remember the gravel hitting the undercarriage of the car several times. And this angel, I think, appeared at the right time, because I think the next time I ran off the road, I was going to end up in a ravine dead. So I told Ken the story, and he said, you know, I haven't forgotten it all these years. Did you ever write it up? And I said, no, I never wrote it up. He said, well, would you please, for a dying man? I said, Ken, you're not dying. Stop saying that, you know. So he said, well, you know, I just feel like my time is coming. I said, well, statistically, maybe, but, you know, I think you've got a long way to go. Your work is still not finished. So I said, yeah, I'll write it up. So I wrote it up, and he said, great. He said, this story is just amazing. He said, you've got to publish it. And I said, well, Ken, it wasn't just the one story. I had a total of 8 angel encounters, 7 of which were life-saving. He said, really? He said, well, would you write them all up? And I said, sure. So I did. And I sent them, and he said, oh my God, he said, I'm having trouble with my eyes. I can barely read anything anymore. He said, but I just, it was compulsively readable. I couldn't stop reading your stories. You must publish this. And I said, well, Ken, it wasn't just the angel encounters, it was a bunch of other extraordinary stuff too. Well, like what? And I said, well, like an amazing vision quest, amazing synchronicities, after death communications, nearing death awareness stuff, and a bunch of stuff. And he said, well, write that up. So I said, oh, okay. So, because Ken has been after me over the years to write. He said he felt that the IANDS story could be better understood if I actually wrote a book. And I never felt compelled to do it, so I never did it. But this kind of evolved over the course of these conversations where one thing led to another. So I wrote part 2, which is a collection of other exceptional stories, and all to kind of evidence incidents of divine intervention and providence in my life. And when I put it all together, I said, you know, this really is extraordinary. Who would believe it? You know, who would believe it? Because it's all so fantastic. And I'm a very private person. I never wanted this work to be about me. It was never how I made my money, which was healthcare administration primarily. And I started this work when I first met Raymond in 1974, Raymond Moody, as an agnostic. I had been raised Catholic, but I kind of gave it up for Lent when I left my father's home at age 18 because I talk about it in the book. I won't belabor it here, but I just got at a very early age turned off to the whole idea of Catholicism. Not to offend anybody who's a practicing Catholic, because whatever works for you is fine with me. But for me, I had to kind of outgrow it and move on. And I went into a time of agnosticism. I'm only interested in truth. I don't care what it is. I just want truth. And I don't care if it's only one true thing. I want to be able to hang my hat on one true thing. I'm not interested in half-truth, falsehood, fiction, fairy tales, you know, or fantasies. So I'm just trying to, I'm a truth seeker, and I'm just trying to make sense of life, why I'm here, who I am, what my responsibility is to others, to the planet, and so on. So I never really felt qualified to pontificate about life's meaning and purpose, you know, so I never did. And so when I finished those part 1 and part 2, Ken said, well, you got a book. I said, no, not really. I said, I've got a part 3. He said, what's the part 3? I said, well, what does all this mean? You know, what's the takeaway? What are the ramifications and implications? What's the significance of all this? So I wrote a part 3. And he said, oh my God, you got to publish this. You got to publish this. So, you know, these stories are intensely personal. And like I said, I'm a private person. And I thought, you know, I really don't know that I want to publish this. But I meditated on it, and I kept getting the message loud and clear that I needed to publish it for all the good it can do at this very critical time on the planet. Diane said it in her opening statement. She said, we're living in very interesting times. And I couldn't agree more. They're interesting times and they're challenging times. So, and they really are the times that try men's souls and women's souls, and the planet's soul, and all the animals. I mean, everybody's feeling it. And so I thought, well, you know, we really only suffer from one problem. We suffer from the problem of flawed perception and flawed thinking. Flawed perception results in flawed thinking. We really don't know who we are or why we're here. Some of us do. Some of us have figured it out. I'm talking about not the fantasies, but not the illusions, but people who've actually discovered truth, objective truth that is unchanging. And some have, and some can claim illumination and enlightenment. But when you look at the state of the world, which I often do, because my barometers of success have really relate to how are we doing as a species? How are we doing as a human civilization? How's the planet doing? And when I look at that level, that macro level, I'm not, I'm concerned. So I thought, okay, maybe I should write the book for really one purpose, and that is to give my stories to the public for their consideration, in the hope that it might inspire more people to conclude that God is real, God, source, creator, ground of all being, first cause, whatever term one wants to use, that a creator source is real, obviously, to me, and so too is the afterlife. So that's why I wrote it, and that's why I published it. In fact, the original title was Affirming God. I was very fond of that title because I felt that that said it all. That's the solution. We must affirm God. And the original subtitle was An Urgent Rescue Plan for Humanity, which I felt it is. Because I don't think we're going to get out of the mess we're in until we have a profound global spiritual awakening. So my friend Virginia Hummel, the author of Cracking the Grief Code and several other books, she not only highly encouraged me to publish the manuscript, but she said, look, I'll offer to help you as a volunteer. I'll do the formatting, I'll cover art, interior design. So I pay attention to little, nudge, nudge, wink, winks like this, because it's usually spirit saying, we want you to do this. Because I don't know the first thing about publishing. In fact, I did try getting an agent, and I would have had an easier time getting an appointment to see the Pope. Trying to get an agent these days, forget about it. And then trying to get them to look at your manuscript. I mean, it's just, that's, and I knew several agents, people who I had helped in the past with their publishing. But Hampton Roads was interested in the book, and they wanted to publish, and they sent me their contract with an advance, and we're going to make it the lead title in the fall of 2023. This was last October, September. We're going to hire an outside publicity firm because we think you've got a powerful book. In fact, it sailed through the publications board, unanimous vote of approval, and that never happens. So, and here's our contract. And I'm looking at this contract, and I said, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I reviewed many contracts throughout my time in healthcare administration, and it was a very one-sided contract. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to give you creative control. There's no way I'm going to let you decide the title or the who writes the foreword or the cover art. That's just not happening. So is any of that negotiable? Of course, they said no. And I said, well, then, deal breaker. So, which left me to self-publish. And self-publishing, it's a revolution. I think I think more books are being self-published now than being traditionally published. But it's expensive, and trying to get marketing and promotion and publicity is damn near impossible, and it's extremely expensive. So, but anyway, I knew I had to get the book out. When Virginia stepped forward, bless her heart, I'll always be grateful to her, to handle the production aspects of it. I said, okay, let's do it. So that's how the book came about. I kind of had to be slightly cajoled into it. And, as I said, my hope is in publishing it. I mean, if I had the money, I would buy a copy and give it to every reading person on the planet, because I feel it's that important. Not because it's my story, because a lot of people have stories similar to mine. I think I can see well, some people I can't see because their image is not up. But for those who I can see, just a show of hands, how many of you have had angel encounters? Okay, I'm counting 2, 3, 4. Okay, all right, 3. All right, so great. So, and I think all of us have had angel assistance, one kind or another. I just don't think we're aware of it or we've defined it as such. I admit that, my stories are rather exceptional, and I'm humbled by them and grateful for them. And I can't explain why I was singled out for 7 life-saving encounters when others in life-threatening situations were not. I don't know the answer to that. But as I said when I spoke at North Shore Auditorium for you guys 4 years ago, did I choose this work or did this work choose me? And when you read the book, you'll find that clearly this work chose me. I just had to pay attention. And maybe it was my soul's purpose in this incarnation. And or maybe it was something else, I don't know. But I don't have data to speak to that point. But nevertheless, it's clear to me, and I thank Ken profusely for encouraging me to write this book, because in writing it, it provided clarity for me about what I've been doing all my life and why, and how it was all sort of divinely purposed. So, it brought me to the conclusion that there are really only 2 ways to live your life. And this is what I'm trying to convey to my fellow human beings across the planet. And this is why I would give them each a copy of the book if I could, because I think it would help and inspire. So 2 ways to live your life. One is as though everything you say, everything you do, everything you think, feel, has transcendent meaning and purpose and consequences. The second way to live your life is as though nothing does. So if you're in the second camp and you don't think there is any transcendent meaning or purpose to anything you do, well, then you come from the materialist model of reality. And most folks in the materialist model think the body is all there is. And they think that when the body dies, that's the end of you. That's it. Oblivion, nothingness, the end of consciousness, the end of being. That gives rise to the every man for himself model of human behavior. Get while the getting is good. And given the state of affairs on the planet today, my impression is that most folks come from that orientation, that this is all there is. And so let's get while the getting is good. And to hell with the other guy. Oneness, that's a joke. Non-duality, that's a fantasy. That's for utopian, high in the sky, primrose path dreamers. So, but for those who are in the first camp who believe that everything you do, say, think, or feel does have transcendent meaning and consequences, then you live your life to have the best possible life review before the being of light. And that gives rise to one for all and all for one. And so the solution here is It's very simple. We have to go from every man for himself to all for one and one for all. The question is, how do we get there? How can we co-create a glorious future for Earth and all its inhabitants? How do we create an optimal future that works equally well for everyone and everything? Not just for a privileged few. This is the challenge we have today. Every thinking person, every conscious person, every person who's illuminated and enlightened, who believes that everything has transcendent meaning, this is the only task before us. And our comfort, our safety, our ego-driven needs take a back seat to that if we're truly walking in the light. And, you know, we just celebrated Good Friday. Well, I shouldn't say celebrated. We're celebrating Easter. And by the way, I'm not a Christian in the traditional sense. I have no religious affiliation. Christians would be mortified at my view of Christ's teachings. But I think I woke up this morning, I got the Wall Street Journal. And I had to show you this because it just exemplifies the problem we have. It's their book review section. Today's Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you can see this. Okay, there's the headline which says, "Are many Jesuses?" Okay, are many Jesuses? And the subhead is, "At a time of shrinking church membership, Jesus remains a uniquely powerful and popular figure in American culture. The great divide, however, is over what he stands for." Because the article points out that there are many different Jesuses that are recognized by different authorities. Each one has their own spin or emphasis on who Jesus was and what Jesus was all about. So there are other beings who walk the planet who are avatars, masters, highly illuminated and enlightened beings who came from love, and they all shared the same basic message, which is love one another. And that, to me, is the essence of the teachings of Christ. Love one another. It's no more complicated than that. And it's not just love one another in a calculating sense, but truly in the agape sense, the agape love, selfless love, unconditional love. And this is what all the near-death experiencers say, for the most part, that this is life's meaning and purpose, to learn to love one another as God loves us all, unconditionally and non-judgmentally. To me, the evidence speaks clearly to that conclusion. And it's what has the most historical integrity, not just from Christ, but Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tse, Muhammad, Gandhi, and many others. This is what the great sages have said, that the same God who made you made me. And we all come from the same source, and we all will return to the same source. Therefore, we're one family. And we need to be our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. So Bill Guggenheim, another good friend of mine who encouraged me to write this book, sent me a Easter present called Stillwater and Koo Save the World. It's, if I pull this up, panda and a baby panda, cute little book. And it's the same message, simplified. You know, and if anything, in Love by the Light, I try to demystify God. I try to liberate God from the Old Testament. And I try to demystify enlightenment. in part three, I go into a discussion about God's attributes, qualities, not from personal experience, but from what the great sages have said over the millennia. And I think there's general agreement that God is love. And cosmologists and physicists will say, if there is an organizing principle of the universe, of the cosmos, it must be unconditional love. And it's kind of what, it was kind of the conclusion that Einstein arrived at the end of his career, where he said, either everything is a miracle or nothing is. And of course, I think what he was saying is everything is a miracle. How can it not be? How does an acorn grow into an oak tree? Every root, every piece of bark, every branch, every stem, every leaf, every other acorn is inside that little nut. You know, how does that happen? How does a galaxy form from simple stardust? Take our Milky Way, 150 billion solar systems like our own. How does that happen? From stardust. How does somebody like Ludwig von Beethoven come about through human union of sperm and egg, that zygote? Okay. Oh my God, everything he ever composed, every piece of music, he was voluminous and prolific. No composer like him. How does all that come from a zygote? So you look at these things and look at a flower. I mean, the Buddha once held a sermon where all he did was look at a lotus flower. And finally, after a while, one of the monks got it. He laughed and laughed because he understood the message that Buddha was trying to convey, which is there are miracles all around you. Just have to wake up to it, discover it, not be asleep at the wheel as I was so many times, as you'll read about in the book. Truly, I was asleep at the switch. And so, the reviewers, they all talk about how an agnostic shed his agnosticism and became a resolutely convinced that God is real, based on evidence, not based on faith. And that's all true. And it took all of these exceptional events in my life for that to happen, which resulted in the founding of what became IANDS. And I'm very proud of what IANDS has done. I take no credit for it, as I said before. I ran it for the first 4 years or so. Yes, I conceived it. Bruce, Ken, and Raymond primarily built it into what it is today. And I'm glad that it's still done so much good in the world. And I'm sure it will go on to do even more good. And I hate it that Chicago IANDS is struggling for money and that IANDS internationally struggles for money, Eternia struggles for money. There's plenty of money for crazy things, like, well, I won't get into it. That'll take me on a whole nother track, but there's plenty of money out there for things that aren't going to be part of the solution, but there's a lot of money for what perpetuates the problem. So the Kirkus reviewer, the guy from Kirkus who wrote the review of Love by the Light, generally gave it a good review, but he said it was unlikely to convince the skeptics. And I think he's right about that. I don't take issue with it. Still, I found it to be a sad statement, because if anything, I didn't write the book to preach to the choir. I wrote it to preach to the folks who are like I was, agnostic, uncertain, confused, who still wonder who they are, why they're here, whether there's a God, whether there's an afterlife. That's primarily who I wrote it for, because I think if they can be inspired to see things differently, we will start to reduce the flawed perceptions, which lead to flawed thinking. And we will, change values to create a more loving world. One that is based on, well, it's more God-centered than self-centered. So that's kind of, what I've been trying to do all these years. And I think the book will help me further that general endeavor. So I actually wrote the book. I mean, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a mentor. I got involved in hospice administration through her. And she would often say, those of you who knew her and were privileged to hear her speak, you could hear a pin drop in the audience whenever she was on the stage talking. But one of the things she often said was, it's always better to light the candle than curse the darkness. And so, I'm very concerned about the human condition and the world situation. And okay, what can we do now that's practical to light the candle? What does that mean in today's world? How do you light the candle in today's world? How can we, who are not blessed with great resources in our own individual lives, today and every day, be the change we want to see in the world? How can we actually make a difference to the point where those macro indicators of success start to kick in? We reduce poverty, we reduce hunger, we reduce violence, we reduce oppression and abuse. How do we get there? Especially challenging today because there's just a great deal of confusion and chaos. We can't agree on many things. I mean, it's a wonder we can even agree on the time of day. Yesterday, I had an important Skype call to London, which I missed because I'm here in Boca Raton, Florida, which is on Eastern time. And we had a daylight savings time recently, and we were setting the clocks forward an hour. And so before this call, I looked, okay, London's Greenwich Mean Time, so I checked to see what's the time in London. And usually it's 5-hour difference. Well, yesterday it was saying it was 4-hour difference. So I said, okay, so I just made it for 4 hours instead of 5. Well, they're not on the same clock in London anymore. So they're like Eastern time, it's Greenwich time +1. So if you go to Google and you look at what's Greenwich Mean Time, they'll give you a time, but you got to add an hour to it because, we can't even agree on what time of day it is. So, I love Voltaire and John Locke before him because they said something very important. They said, I'm not going to have a conversation with you or anyone else until we can agree on terms. How do we define the terms we're going to be using? Even defining the time of day. So here we are in a world where there's never been more division and polarization. I mean, it's the Tower of Babel exponentially applied. We're all speaking a different language just about. So, the question is, how can we get on the same page with at least a few fundamentals? And to me, what's most important is to agree on whether or not there's a creator and agree on what the definition of that creator is, at least in simple terms. The creator is an imponderable, I agree, that which cannot be defined, but we can start to know creator by, let's call them signature trademark qualities like love, Clearly, the fact that we're having this conversation is a miracle and a manifestation of unconditional love, that I've been given this body, this brain, the ability to breathe in and out, this planet to walk on, the food that sustains me. What is all that? And where does all that come from? I don't take it for granted. You know, every day I go through life in a state of gratitude. So I said to myself, you know, how do we make God real? How do we make the afterlife real? Not just, yeah, we're going to continue for eternity. And by the way, I don't believe in eternal salvation or eternal damnation. The data doesn't support that. The data that I'm familiar with supports continuation of consciousness. And it supports the notion, what the ancient mystics used to say, what you do to others, you do to yourself, which means there's accountability. True, God is non-judgmental as far as I can tell. And in one's life review, one is judging oneself. Creator isn't judging anyone. Creator, unconditional love can only be unconditional love. Can't be inconsistent. Can't be discriminatory. Can't choose favorites, no matter how wicked they might be. However, my take on it, and it is strictly my take, and I'm trying to commit this, I'm not a scientist, but I approach things with the discipline of a scientist. I try to look at the data, and I try to look at all the possible explanations, and I try to, through a process of logic and deductive reasoning, I try to come up with what I think is the most appropriate conclusion. And that's the one I run with until, or unless something proves me that it's otherwise, which case I'll stop on a dime and change quickly to whatever the data supports. But in this case, my take on it is, and I explain all this in the book, and I made a few, I wouldn't say enemies, I would say I had some feisty conversations with people who were locked into the whole notion of good and evil. Yes, there is evil. Yes, there is darkness, and there is an abundance of it. Truly, darkness is upon the face of the land today. So what do we do about it? You know, and it gets to the whole challenge of defining creator. Who or what is creator? That there is a creator should not be an issue, any more than that there is life after death. That shouldn't, we shouldn't be having that conversation anymore. The data is just too compelling. If people compare, if people really bother to look at it. And it brings me to, you know, that conclusion in the book that I said, you know, for those who believe, no evidence is needed. And for those who don't believe, no amount of evidence is necessary. I'm sorry, no amount of evidence is sufficient. So, you know, no matter how much evidence you throw at it, if they're locked in, well, they'll probably only change on their deathbed, which is sad because unless we all get on the same page, we're going to fall short of creating an optimal future. So my take on this whole thing with judgment is that we judge ourselves during the life review. What we've done that's loving, we are very proud of that, and we're uplifted by that. Now remember, this life review takes place in the presence of Source Creator. And they always define, these experiencers always define Source Creator in terms of being a very bright light, brighter than a trillion suns, but doesn't hurt the eyes, and indescribable love. The kind of love that has no equal. They never felt more loved, and all they want to do, it's ultimate in bliss, ultimate in ecstasy. It's the ultimate euphoria. It's the highest high. You can't get any higher than that. And so when you're in that state, who wants to leave it? That's what we all yearn for. They don't want to leave it. They want to hang there forever and ever and ever. They want to rejoin as one with God. However, unless you can match the signature vibration and frequency of unconditional love, meaning the Christ consciousness or cosmic consciousness, then that kind of assimilation into the Godhead is impossible. So it's not God judging you, and it's not God saying you got to go back and atone. It's you saying, okay, I see now where I need to fine tune, make some adjustments so that I can become one with God again, which seems to me to be the goal. That is bliss. That is heaven. You can't get any higher than that. If that's the end goal, then why would we waste our time doing anything other than trying to raise what I call in the book our God quotient, so that we become more effective purveyors of divine love and light. So I am loved by the light, and every single thing on the planet is loved by the light equally and unconditionally and non-judgmentally. So how does the light deal with evil? Well, first of all, the light didn't create evil. The light created free will. Light created creation. And with that free will came the element of choice. So we have the freedom to choose how we're going to be at any given time of the day. And to me, it's a binary choice. Are we going to be loving, or are we going to be non-loving? So if we're going to be loving, then it has to be a pure love, selfless love, not the kind of love that seeks reward or reciprocation or recognition, but the kind of love that God shows us. I mean, the sun doesn't choose who it shines on. The earth doesn't choose who it will support. These are gifts that are given unconditionally. Gibran said it pretty well. He said, "He to whom God gives his night and days deserves all else from me." So we're not supposed to judge. Yet we know that there are a lot of folks who come from, let's just say, a non-loving attitude. They're uncaring, they're not compassionate, they are totally lost in ego and self-importance and self-indulgence. Well, okay, how are we supposed to deal with that? The same way Creator deals with it, which is to pour love and light all over it. I learned this on the Vision Quest. My job was to be, I got the medicine name First Light, and my job was to go into places that are dark and introduce the first few particles of light. So we're not supposed to kill evil or vanquish it or obliterate it. We're supposed to love it. Now, I have a hard time with this one. Trust me, I do, because I would much rather exterminate evil quickly so that we can have Shangri-La. But it doesn't work that way. God could pull the plug on evil anytime God chose to, but God does not. No matter how wicked, diabolical, and unsightly it is, it's tolerated. I mean, the most graphic example, since we're here at Easter weekend, fortuitously, I still can't watch stories about the life of Christ because it's just overwhelming to me that they would kill pure love. But nevertheless, it is a graphic example of the darkness and the light and the struggle. And, when Christ was killed, to me, the whole story took on great significance and timeless appeal by virtue of the end of it, where Christ said, forgive them for they know not what they do. That is the ultimate in unconditional love. And after Christ died, what did God do to Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate and, those who brutalized Christ? Nothing. There were a lot of weird things that happened right after Christ died, but none of the people who were involved in the murder of Christ suffered any consequences. Now, if ever there was a time when God might be tempted to rain fire on evildoers from up above, that would have been it. But God chose not to. So, I did. This is the divine blueprint. I did not create it, and I didn't create the food chain. These are things that I have to accept. But I do know that we're supposed to try here as best we can to build a more perfect world. And, this is what the founding fathers tried to do. Back when they were having the Constitutional Convention that led to the United States of America, they were drafting Constitution and Declaration of Independence and all that. And, Ben Franklin and Tom Jefferson were a big part of that. And these guys regarded Christ to be their hero. Thomas Jefferson, there's a document, he actually wrote, there's this book called the Jefferson Bible, and it was his own personal Bible. And he took bits and pieces out of the New Testament and just kind of pasted them together, and he used it as bedtime reading. And it was all about universal brotherhood and love and generosity and compassion and kindness. And he said in his writings, he said that he felt that Christ had advanced the most sophisticated system of morality ever conceived by man. And it was in large part why you get so inspired by the Declaration of Independence. And it was there were some mystical influences in the founding of America. And God was at the front and center of it. Ben Franklin, actually, the idea that in part 3 of my book, I talk about an exercise called God for a Day, which is, I think, the best way to get to know God, to strengthen the connection with God, and to feel God's love, to emulate God's love for all things as best one can in a formal exercise, which I describe in the book. And this idea came from Ben Franklin's 13 virtues. And one of his virtues was, if you want to lead a wholesome, principled life, emulate Socrates and Jesus. Ben Franklin said it, wise man. So I'm saying the same thing in so many words. The God for a Day exercise, there's a lot I could tell you about that. But to me, that's the way we can, move forward to make this place to make the world a better place. But which Jesus should we emulate? And as the article says, there are many Jesuses, okay? It's good. It's a book review of a book by that title. Well, give me a break. I mean, this is the problem we have. People putting their spin. You could say, well, John, you're putting your spin. Well, okay. But I think mine is a sustainable, defensible spin. And I think it's supported by data. So and mine is simple. The Jesus that I'm talking about, the God I'm talking about, has one law, and that is to love one another unconditionally. And if we do that, if we can pull that off, we can create a phenomenal world. So all the crises that we're currently challenged by can be solved if we can learn to put more love in our hearts and to practice that on a daily basis. Now, I can hear some of you saying, well, unconditional love works if everybody's doing it, But if I'm the only one who's doing it, well, kind of sucks for me. Well, you could say that. And that's a very important consideration, because unconditional love does work really well when everybody's coming from unconditional love. But if you're one of a few, well, you're kind of like the lamb being led to the slaughter. So I asked myself, I gotta pause for a drink of water. So I asked myself, why did Jesus give himself up for the slaughter before Pontius Pilate? Because Pilate didn't want to crucify him, he wanted to let him go. And he kept giving Christ different opportunities to save his skin. But Christ kept saying, my kingdom is not of this world. See, Christ knew he wasn't the body. He knew that this lifetime was the blinking of an eyelid. He knew better than to take the material world too seriously, because it is an illusion. Space and time are an illusion. This body is an illusion. It seems real, and it's real when you're in it, and it's not too much fun when it's not working well, and you're in physical or mental distress. Nevertheless, it's an illusion. I've seen it many times at hospice as people transition and they give up the mortal coil. So it's a remarkable thing. And Elizabeth was right, Kubler-Ross, she was right when she said the dying have a lot to teach. And they do. So, my God is the God of love. The Jesus that I recognize is a being of love, unconditional love, who has seen through the illusions of this world. And it's not that you have to convert to Christianity. It's what I think what Christ was trying to say is, and others before him and after him, was the things that I can do, you can do, and greater. That's a quote. If you had the faith, you could move. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, you could move mountains. Except that you be like me, you cannot know the kingdom of heaven, meaning you cannot become one with God. Meaning, if you're not in unconditional love, you can't match the signature frequency vibration of God. Therefore, you can't hang out with God for eternity, can't rejoin the Godhead. This is kind of the conclusion I've arrived at from 48 years of serious work in this area. Now, I got real excited about Raymond Moody's work in 1974. I invited him to speak on the campus of Augusta College, where I was an undergraduate. I was fresh out of the Army. By the way, if you do get my book and you do read the book, there's a part in there that talks about how I met Raymond. Don't have time today to go into that, but all of the things that had to happen for me to meet Raymond and to recognize the importance of the work he was doing when I met him is quite a story. I call it cosmic choreography, and it's worth reading. And so how anybody can get through this book, at least parts 1 and 2, and still wonder whether there's a God or an afterlife, or what the meaning and purpose of life is, it just goes way over my head. I mean, I don't understand how anybody could not arrive at the same conclusions, even not having had the same experiences. But I do say, if you're still unconvinced, here's a way you can meet God for yourself. And I explain different induction techniques. And I also explain the God for a Day exercise, which is, I think, one of the best ways to become acquainted with God and to feel God's love, and to be a purveyor of God's love. So when you walk a mile in God's shoes, meaning you be his love unto all things, that's how you grow close. That's how you achieve communion. That's my highest high. I've done the exercise several times, and it's my highest high, kind of habit forming. So to me, love is the answer. Love is the cure-all. And I don't know much, and I say this in the beginning of the book. I don't claim to know very much at all. In fact, I quote Socrates of the inspiration of Ben Franklin, and who was very famous for saying, I know that I know nothing. So I know that I know nothing. And the more I learn, the less I know. That's cliche, I understand, but it's true. I'm constantly amazed by how much I don't know. But what I do know, and what I'll take to the bank, well, I won't take it to the bank anymore because I'm worried about the banks, but what I do know for sure is that God is real, and so too is the afterlife, and that the meaning and purpose of life, eternal life, is to love all things as God loves us. I don't mean other human beings alone. I mean animals, trees, the oceans, the earth, everything, because everything is derivative of source creator, and we're all one with it. So, my original title, I started telling you about that earlier, Affirming God. I wanted to make the strongest statement I could, but I got a lot of blowback from people about that. They said, not a good idea to use God in the title. Really? What's wrong with God? When did God fall out of favor? Well, I came to realize that many people equated God with the God of religion. And the God of religion is kind of more Old Testament, vengeful, wrathful, angry, jealous, possessive, inconsistent, discriminatory, saving some and smiting others. Not a God of unconditional love. The New Testament, however, describes the God of love and is more consistent with what I think we've learned from studying spiritually transformative experiences. So I have this feeling that the God of religion is what has polarized most people and turned most people off to the idea of God, which is why, this article says, at a time of shrinking church membership, okay, Wall Street Journal, true, church membership is experiencing decline. Why? Well, there's been a lot of corruption in the church. When I say the church, I mean mostly the Christian faith, and certainly the Catholic faith from which I sprung. You go back and you look at this. There's a great book I want to recommend to you, which I talk about and I quote in Love by the Light. It's called The History of God by Karen Armstrong. And she gets into a lot of, the history of God. Where the term originate in the 6th century AD? And where it originated is a mystery. We don't really know, but where it came from. But the God of religion is not relevant to people. And that's why we have a crisis today. People don't know where they can turn for political leadership. They don't know where they could turn for spiritual leadership. They don't know who they can trust, who they can believe in. They don't know who's who and what's what. It's just a time of great confusion. So, like I said, we can't even agree on the time of day. So I'm like, okay, what can we do? Those of you who are watching or participating in this podcast, and those who will see it later when it goes online, what can we do to pour love and light on the darkness? How can we get from where we are to where we could be? And as I say at the end of the book, haven't we suffered long enough? Haven't we waited long enough? To me, I'm all for having a more perfect union. I'm all for making reality uh, the best it can be, not just my own, but for everybody. I'm one of these guys I'm wired in such a way that if everybody isn't happy and having a good time and well cared for, then neither am I. So, we have to make the world work equally well for everyone and everything. So how do we get there? So at the last part of the book, I talk about the God for a Day exercise. I recommend that people go streaming. That's not watching your smart TV. It's I invented the term streaming back in 76. I talk about how that came about, but to me, streaming was just a way to induce deep state meditation. And I had a favorite place to go in there's a synchronicity, the Jefferson National Forest in Southwest Virginia by Blacksburg, Virginia, I went to graduate school at Virginia Tech, and used to go to Jefferson National Forest to the Cascades. And there's 60-foot waterfall there. You have a 2-mile hike up to the waterfall. And there's this great stream all the way along the path leading to the waterfall. And there's these huge boulders out in the stream. And I would go out to my favorite boulder, and I would put my backpack under my head, and I close my eyes, and I would just let the sound of the stream carry me into a very deep state meditation. So that's one way. No ohms, no fasting, no lotus position. I just lay down on a rock and I let the sound of the stream carry me. The forest bathing is go out and find your favorite forest and find your favorite tree and connect with it on an energetic level. And before long, nature's beauty and vibration will carry you into a deep state meditation. So if God's not real, and if love is not in your heart, there's work to do. And the first step, the first challenge is to become God-centered and not self-centered. And that can be done through forest bathing or through streaming or through any of the dozen or so induction techniques that I talk about in the book. When we do this, when we form this connection with God, it's the only way we can truly satisfy what Blaise Pascal called the God-shaped hole. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with that concept, but it's a great concept. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher, mathematician, and he had a spiritually transformative experience in 1654. And he wrote a book in 1670 where he talks about this concept of the God-shaped hole. Now, I think if you can follow me here intuitively, you'll understand what I'm saying. The God-shaped hole is a yearning deep within the core of everyone's being. It's a yearning to connect with something greater than yourself, something larger than yourself, something or someone. And really, it's a yearning to return to the source from whence we came. It's a homesickness, if you will. Could be a homing beacon for all I know, but I'm aware of what it is. Mine is full because I'm connected every day. I don't have a God-shaped hole because God is real to me moment to moment, and I'm constantly checking in. I don't have any special abilities. I can't raise the dead or heal the sick, can't walk on water. I'm working on it, but I'm not there yet. So anyway, I think many of us, though, suffer from the God-shaped void or hole, and filling that with God is the only cure. So in order to bring God inside to fill that void, it's simple. All you need to do is be a purveyor of God's love out in the world. I put many biblical references in the book to what I'm saying here. let me say, I think the opening biblical quote really says it all. I can find it. The perfect quote. And it's there it is. 1 John 4:16. I believe me, I don't often quote the Bible. When I find quotes like this, I can't help myself. So we have come to know and to trust in the love that God has for us. For God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in them. I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, there's God for a day. So become God's love, bring it into the world, fill the God-shaped hole, experience the natural high that's better than any other high. And it's the way you can genuinely give unconditional love without regard for how it's affecting you, because you start to climb out of ego. You start to climb into what Christ called the truth that sets you free. You begin to realize that this life doesn't matter, only except that you devote it to being a vessel of love, a purveyor of love at all times. And what is love? Is kindness. It's generosity, it's compassion, it's empathy, it's sensitivity, it's goodness, it's giving of yourself. So I recommend the book that Bill sent me as an Easter gift, Save the World, by Stillwater and Koo, Save the World. I just got it. And I read it. It takes 2 minutes to read. It's my kind of book. It's got a lot of big pictures. And so Stillwater and Koo, Save the World. It's very, bringing love out into the world is a very simple thing to do. And you don't have to be diminished, in the process. So, going back to the people who, I'm going to stop here in a few minutes so I can give time for discussion and questions, because I know we only have about a half hour left. But my book was really intended not so much for the choir, but for the folks who've yet to join the choir. And actually, maybe to the choir to an extent, to get them all on the same page about, these big questions and these big issues. Because that's the point. Until we get on the same page about a few fundamentals, like who we are and why we're here, we're going to continue to have conflict. So in the book, I talk about macro level stuff like social ideologies and ideological infrastructure of nation states, and how at the very core they should be God-centered, which is what Jefferson and Franklin tried to do, when they were writing the founding documents that gave rise to America. So unless we put God at the center and truly mean what we say, in God we trust, and e pluribus unum, that kind of stuff. One nation under God. Until we truly get there and realize that all this stuff we've been chasing, the materialism, the power, the fame, the money, the self-importance, it's all a lie. It's a joke. At the end, you don't take it with you. All you take with you is your record of deeds. And all you're proudest of is the love you gave. Not how much money you made, not, how much power you had, how many degrees you have, but how much love did you give? That's it. What's your God quotient? If it's 100%, hey, you get to rejoin the Godhead. Until then, you got work to do. You got to keep coming back. I don't know if it's in human form or if it's to planet Earth. I think it is for some, but not necessarily for everyone. So the book really does try to offer a pathway for those who still doubt and wonder. I just hope that all the experiences I shared, including my mother's attempt to abort me in first trimester and how I found out about that. It was another major story. If they're not convinced by these stories, I don't know what will convince them. But I do put in the book the 7 statements, turning to 7 statements, which are instructive on this point. And it's meant for people to consider as basic ideology for their life and basic ideology for social infrastructures, because a country can only be as strong as its ideological foundation. And if its ideological foundation is a lie, then that country or that society will be a lie, and it will be ill-fated over time. So I guess my closing statement would be to quote Gandhi, which is, you want to change the world, then be the change you want to see in the world, which means be giving, be loving, be kind, be compassionate, even to those who in your mind don't deserve it, and be forgiving, because that's what we're asked to do, expected to do by the great sages, and I'm not going to question them. And I do know, and I quote this in the book as well, that, and I've seen this in my own personal life, the more you give out of yourself, the more that comes back. They say tenfold, some say 100-fold. So be the change you want to see in the world. Do it each day of every day. And if you like my book, recommend it to others, because nobody knows about it. I have no way of really spreading the word because I can't afford a publicist, and it's very expensive. So everyone who's read it loves it, and it's getting good reviews and all, but I need, as I say, I need to make every person on the planet aware of it for all the good it can do. So with that, I will open this up to questions. I think we have about a half hour.
That's right. We have a few questions already on the chat. If you want to look at the chat or you want me to read them, be glad to do that. Joe says, I'm confused. You keep referencing God, yet you are not a believer. Which is it? You want to clarify that?
Sure. I was not a believer. Well, early in my life, I believed in God in an abstract way, in a conceptual way. And I felt there was something greater. I kind of feel like God has always been with me and connected to me, let's just say the divine realm. But Catholicism kind of beat it out of me. I mean, Catholicism for me was a very negative experience. And so after the church, I became, when I left home at age 18, I tried other religions, but none of them really spoke to my heart. So I kind of went into a period of agnosticism that stayed with me until really 1974, 75. I started meeting people through Raymond Moody, who had the near-death experience. And that's when I began to collect data. And over the course of 10, 15 years of data collection, not just near-death experiences, but other kinds of spiritually transformative experiences, and some of the things that happened in my own life, which are explained in my book, that's when I left agnosticism as a flawed belief system and became convinced that God is real, and so too is the afterlife. Not as a matter of faith and dogma, but as a resolute conviction born of certainty that came out of critical thinking from the review of the evidence that I was privileged to encounter both in hospice work and in my interviews with people, hundreds of people who had spiritually transformative experiences. So now let me be very clear about that. I am no longer an agnostic. I am a firm believer in source, creator, God, and an afterlife.
Wonderful. Clara said I think you answered this, but she said you admit that there is evil, so how can we have unconditional love to a Hitler, Idi Amin, or any torturer while we're here on Earth?
Yeah, it's a tough one for me too, believe me. It's like I said earlier, I would really like to rid the world of all evil, and I wish I could. I wish we all could. Um, but that's not how it works. So evil exists more so today probably than ever before. I mean, I wasn't alive during the Civil War. That had to be pretty bad, World War II. And for those who are involved in any kind of situation that involves violence or bondage or oppression or abuse, it's a hell. So hell, there's a lot of hellishness on the planet right now, and a lot of evil. But it's coming from human beings making poor choices that are born of flawed perceptions of reality. They're coming from ego, and they don't know who they really are and why they're really here. And so, what is my job in response to that? Well, I can only look to the sages and avatars like Christ and God. And God, God didn't create evil. God created free will, and God made creation possible, the stage where free will is allowed to play out. So free will involves choice. You can choose to be loving, you can choose to be unloving. Um, God is not a camp commandant. God is not a puppet master who has enslaved us all. He says, you've got to be loving and good, or I'm going to smite you. I mean, that wouldn't be free will. That would be bondage. Um, God has no ego. That's the kind of game that someone coming from ego. So God doesn't pull the plug on evil. God tolerates evil. Um, so what is our job? Our job is to do what Christ tried to do. Try to transmute evil. By example, you pour love and light all over it. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. Love can heal the sick. It can raise the dead. It can do all kinds of things, as Christ demonstrated, and others too. I don't. Every living thing can respond to love, and every living thing needs love. So, to me, responsibility to evil. Look, that's their karma, and they're going to have to account for that. And I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of those who perpetrate evil, because coming back and having to learn those lessons cannot be an easy thing to do. But our job is to forgive and be non-judgmental and to love, as Christ tried to show on the cross.
Clara also said, I believe there is a reason for everything, but I'd like your take on it.
She would like what?
She'd like your take on it.
Oh, a reason for everything. I try to confine myself to what the data allows me to say or expound upon. This thing about a reason for everything. I'm not sure about it. I don't know the answer to that. If you throughout my book, I explain that a number of things happened to me along the way that are really inexplicable. They're miraculous, and I know they all happen for a reason, which is to put me on this path and so that I can do the work I'm doing. And some say that this is my life's purpose, that this was my soul's intention upon birth, and that it's all been mapped out for me and cosmically choreographed. I have a hard time disputing that because my whole life sort of has been cosmically choreographed. I mean, from 1960 at age 8 in third grade, when my best friend's mother had a heart attack, and she had come home, and my friend, whose name was Mike, was very disturbed that his mother was a whole different person, and she had died and come back. Um, and he wanted his old mother back. His new mother had become a Jesus freak, in his words. And I met her, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks after she got back from the hospital, and Mike was right. Mrs. Waters was a different person. She was glowing. You could see the change in her. Her countenance was different. Her aura was different. I don't see auras, but she was glowing. And she had died and gone to heaven. She met God and Jesus and the angels, and that's all she wanted to talk about. And I said, yeah, Mike, you're right. You know, your mom has become a Jesus freak. Well, you know, when I met Raymond in 1974, because a classmate of mine told me about her neighbor who was doing this interesting research concerning people who had died and come back to life and their experiences in the meantime. I'm like, oh, I got to meet this guy. And it was because of the event in third grade, Mrs. Waters, when I met her and she told me her story. Now, so I've got to, in a way, intuitively believe that, yes, there is a purpose for everything. But does that just mean the major things, or does that mean the minor things too? So everything is a broad, all-encompassing term. And, you know, I mean, is there a reason I choose to wear one shirt versus another? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But is there a reason I met Mrs. Waters, Mike Waters, in the third grade, and then his mother? Absolutely. You know, so yes, I think there is absolutely a reason for some things that happen to us in life. I just don't know if that means all things.
Yeah. Rhonda and Dave said your message is spot on. How we are here to learn and live love. Thank you for this. Also, your company that Diane shared with us in the email, Eternia, it's Eternia, not eternal.org, is quite many lofty, high ideals. Ken Wilber is doing something similar in Colorado at the Integral Institute. He brings leaders from every walk of life together to bring a broader perspective and communicate together. I wonder if you have thought about connecting with him and other leaders in transpersonal psychology.
I'm familiar with Ken Wilber's work. I have great respect for his work. I don't know him, never met him, but certainly I would be delighted to connect with him in some way. I'm sort of a single track thinker. I'm sort of focused on what I'm trying to do, which I just spent the last hour and a half trying to explain. And Eternia has been criticized for being too grandiose, too idealistic, too utopian. And I don't make any apologies for that. I mean, I don't know what's wrong with idealism or utopianism, frankly. I mean, I think if you're of sound mind, you want utopia. You want things to be as good as they can be. And you know, I'm really quoting the Confucius strategy here in basic Buddhism about getting right in your perception so you can get right in your knowledge, so you can get right in your thinking, so you can get right in your action. And to me, it starts with deciding, well, making your mind up about God and the afterlife. That to me is fundamental. It's the first order of business. And so, you know, I have not changed my message since 1974. I've been saying the same thing in different ways since then. And you know, I'm sorry for those who don't understand Eternia or think it's too ambitious, too macro oriented. It's never really been funded appreciably, so it's only minimally operational. but I keep the faith and I know it's what I'm supposed to do. So um, I'm just going to keep plugging ahead. And I'd love to join forces with those who are on the same page, with those who resonate with the same goal. But I find I've met a lot of people in the spiritual awakening community, and we're just not all coming from the same place. Um, I mean, some may talk the talk, but they don't walk the talk. Um, and there's a lot of inconsistency. And I frankly don't have, I'm 70 years old now, you know, I don't have time for that sort of thing. I'm interested in those who get it, who understand it, and who want to proceed with the great work, which is individual transformation and transformation of social and political and economic uh, infrastructure. So I say, you know, this is about trying to change human nature and the nature of social, political, and economic systems so we can create a world, co-create a world that works equally well for everyone. And if Ken Wilber is on that same page, I haven't read his recent stuff. And if his institute is on that same page, which I presume it is because I've always pretty much admired his work, then yes, I'd be delighted to join forces, provided that, you know, that Ken and anybody else I'm dealing with is coming from the very same place philosophically, and provided that it's all rooted deeply in integrity. Because you have to be, not only do you have to be the change you want to see in the world, but you have to lead by example. You have to talk the talk and walk the talk. And I've tried my best all these years to live up to that standard, because we're in a world today that is extremely cynical, and it should be. It should be, because you got a lot of baiting and switching going on out there. You know, you got a lot of people who can speak the rhetoric, you know, really well, great charisma and magnetism, but they fall way short on delivering the goods. So I hope that answers the question.
I like to think in a positive way that it's always darkest before the dawn. So we have good things to look forward to.
Amen.
And I strongly, strongly believe that light is much more powerful than dark.
Yes.
Those are good things. Arsa says you mentioned abortion very briefly. Where does that fit into the cosmic structure? I'm asking this aside from all the legal and religious views.
I'm sorry, say the question again, please.
You mentioned abortion very briefly.
Oh, yeah.
Where does that fit into the cosmic structure?
Well, I was associate administrator at JFK Hospital in 1984. And for my job, I spent most of the summer in Los Angeles interviewing, let's call them practitioners of holistic health and seers, soothsayers, psychics, oracles, energy healers, etc. One of the people I met was a psychic named Stefan, who had had 2 near-death experiences. And he came back with exceptional psychic abilities. I guess he was struck by lightning, at least one of the 2 experiences. And he claimed to know me from a former life. Claimed he was very happy to see me again. I did not have soul recognition, but then again, I haven't had that much in my life. But anyway, he said, you're a skeptic, you're a cynic, you're analytical, you're intellectual. We got a lot of work to do together. So for you to respect what I'm going to tell you, I need to tell you something about yourself that you don't know, but that you can verify. I said, okay, shoot, what is it? He said, well, it's going to hurt. So I know you love your mother. I know you're close to your mother, but did you know? No, you don't know. I'm going to be the first to tell you. She tried to abort you several times. Now I want you to call her and ask her. My mom, at the time, my mom was living in Georgia. And I said, well, no, I know nothing about this. So, okay, I'll call her and ask her. He said, well, she's going to deny it. So you're going to need to tell her how she did it. I said, okay. And said she used quinine, castor oil, and a coat hanger. Okay. Now I have a cervical spine issue, which is pretty serious, and it came from the multiple abortion attempts. But he said that was the first time your life was saved in utero by divine intervention. But it wasn't the only time. Your life was saved many times. Anyway, he went on and on and on. And I said, let me call my mom. So I did. And my mom and I are very close. And I love her very much. She's gone. She left in 06, which I talk about in the book. That was pretty amazing. And I said, Mom, I'm here for my job. I've got a question to ask. There is no right or wrong answer. I just need the truth. I won't judge you harshly. I won't love you any less. Did you try to abort me? First trimester. And she said, and this is my mother's sense of humor. This is a direct quote. She had 9 kids, which is one of the reasons she tried to abort me back then. I'll go into the details later, but she said, I tried to abort all of you. I said, Mom, no, seriously, I need to know. Did you try to abort me? And she said, who the hell remembers? And then I said, Mom, really, this is for my job. I need to know, where are you getting all this from? From this psychic. He tells me that you tried to abort me. Did you try to abort me? And her last response was, go scratch your ass. These are quotes. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. This is quote. These are quotes. I said, Mom, did you use quinine, castor oil, and a coat hanger? In the book, I say there was a long pregnant pause. I couldn't resist the pun, but there was a long pause. And finally, she came back and she goes, and this is another quote, how in the hell did you know that? Nobody knows that but me. It's the psychic, Mom. Well, he's one hell of a good psychic. Yes, it's true, but son, I'm so sorry. Mom, no forgiveness needed. You should forgive me for coming into your life at a time that was extremely complicated. And in her defense, I would have done the same thing if I had been a woman, because Mom got married when she was 18 to the Italian stallion, Frank, 4 kids, boom, boom, boom. She good Catholic, be fruitful and multiply, no birth control. He left her for another woman, no child support, no alimony. She had to work 3 jobs, one of which was a waitress, and at a diner, I think it was in Connecticut, where she met my father. He was flirtatious and wooed his way into her heart, did not tell her he was married with a daughter. She became pregnant with me, did not tell him about the pregnancy, and tried to abort me because she couldn't afford the 4 kids she had. And she was getting a lot of help from her sisters, in terms of babysitting and stuff while she worked jobs, but she really didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. So we had a great exchange, my mom and I, over this, forgave each other. She finally understood what I was saying when I said, look, I'm sorry for coming into your womb at a time that was so tumultuous and stressful. She goes, well, you didn't have any choice in that. I said, well, there's some who believe you choose your parents. I don't know whether that's true or not, because I don't have the data for it, but some believe it. And if that's true, I just want to say that if I did choose you, it's because of your big heart, and it's big. You got a heart big as this world, and you're all about your kids. Very selfless woman. And so forgive me for trying to complicating your life more, because I came through. I was born, despite the abortion attempt. So to answer your question, my personal feeling about abortion, I think all life is sacred, and all life is a gift. But I would not put myself in the position of having to decide for a woman like my mother whether abortion is the correct thing to do. Every action is karmic. So again, it's a binary system. What is loving and what is unloving? I think my mother's decision to try to abort me, and I only speak to that because I can only speak to that. I support it. You know, last thing she needed was another kid at that point in time. God had other plans for me and prevented the abortion from being successful, despite repeated attempts that kind of screwed up the cervical spine. But nevertheless, I'm here, and I'm not too handicapped by it as a result. But you know, it gives me problems, but I don't wear it like a badge of honor. I mean, I just, you know, it just is what it is. So it's for each individual person to decide what's right for them. Do I believe government should legislate morality? Well, no, I really don't. But I think that government shouldn't be protecting us from one another. We should protect ourselves. We should be so evolved and so spiritually aware and conscious that we can be self-governing, that we don't need speed limits, because we would never operate a motor vehicle in an unsafe way for fear that it might cause damage to others. You know, so I think we should be so evolved in our spirituality, Christ consciousness, if you will, that we can distinguish between what is loving and what is unloving. And I think our general rule should always be, WWJD, what would Jesus do? The corollary, what would love do? What would love do? That's how one should approach these things.
I'd like to add a little PS to that. On the other side, I learned that there is no one way to do anything. And I think that's really very important. And the other thing is that if you keep in mind that there's no way to kill the soul. When you have an abortion, you're not killing the soul. You're only killing the cells. And I just don't see how it can be anybody's business one way or the other. Whatever you choose is right for you to do in your life at that time is what's most important.
Yes.
And I don't think any harm is done by choosing either choice. You choose the one that's right for you at the time, and that's the right choice. And to have anybody tell you that you're killing a baby, I think is preposterous. It's just not true, because you don't kill that baby. Carol Bowman wrote a couple of wonderful books about children's past lives. And in the second book in particular, she has, they're stories of souls of children who died and were reborn in the same family. And these children, they are clearly not dead. They came again to. She tells the story of one woman whose little child died and was reborn to her in another body, and the child remembered his toys and things from the first time he was born to her. He had cancer. He died when he was 2. And he came back to her some years later when she was remarried and had already 2 other children in between. And here he is again. He's talking about, as a toddler, he's talking about what he did and the toys he had and where they lived. And, he wanted to see these places. There's so much literature like this. There's the work of Ian Stevenson, so many stories like this in his research. It's repeated over and over again. I just don't think anybody has the right to tell you what to do in your life.
Yeah.
You to go within and find what's best for you. Anyway, sorry, just had to add a PS. Anyway, wow. I think we've got the questions. Thank you so much, John. It's been such a wonderful pleasure to have you back, and I'm so happy about your book. I'm still hoping to have another one before I go if I live long enough. I have an 80th birthday in June, so
Oh,
after 80 years, you don't know what you're gonna be doing. But if I have time enough, I'm gonna get some things on paper too. I've got a bunch of stories too, and it's a wonderful thing to do. So glad to see all of you here today. Hope to see you at Ruby's, and hope you'll participate in our brief anniversary celebration, such as it is, and come back next month to meet with us again, Suzanne Northrop. So take good care, everybody, and thank you again, John, so much.
yeah, thank you for having me, Dan. I enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank
Happy
you.
Easter, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Really appreciate it.